And the UN atomic watchdog has visited Japan's Fukushima plant to inspect the decontamination efforts that are underway. And this visit by the International Atomic Energy Agency's chief coincides with Tokyo's approval of an energy plan that will mark the country's return to nuclear power.
Important measures to improve the safety and the security of this important facility have been introduced in cooperation with the IAEA at a moment where Japan is embarking on a gradual return to the nuclear energy in its national energy mix.
Mr. Grossi's visit involves collecting seawater samples with scientists from China and South Korea, and the IAEA said that this is so that they can check for themselves that it is safe. In 2023, plant operator TEPCO began discharging 1.3 million tons of treated groundwater, seawater and rainwater, along with water used for cooling the reactors into the sea. The IAEA and TEPCO said that all radioactive elements have been filtered out. But countries including China and Russia have criticized the release and banned Japanese seafood imports.
アルプス処理水の海洋放出につきまして、日本政府は最後の一滴まで安全な放出を行うべく、引き続き IAEA の関与の下で安全性を確保するとともに、国際社会に対して透明性高く情報発信をしてまいります。
The IAEA is closely monitoring Japan's decommissioning efforts at the Fukushima Daiichi plant after the 2011 earthquake triggered tsunami, and that disaster killed 18,000 people, and it set off the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. And Japan had previously vowed to reduce reliance on nuclear power as much as possible, but this pledge was dropped from the latest strategic energy plan, which states an intention for nuclear power to account for around 20% of Japan's energy supply by 2040. And that interest of Japan, that renewed interest in nuclear energy, echoes a global trend where nuclear power is seen as a potential solution to energy crises and carbon emissions. Nuclear energy was first developed for bombs during World War II, but since the 1950s, humanity has turned its attention to using fission for power generation. And today, nuclear power plants operate in 31 countries, supplying around 9% of the world's electricity. That's more than 2,600 terawatt hours. To put that into perspective, that's enough to power all of Japan for more than 2 years. In 2023, 14 countries produced at least 1/4 of their electricity from nuclear power. France gets up to around 70% of its electricity from nuclear, while Ukraine, Slovakia and Hungary rely on it for about half of their power. And the industry is not slowing down. Bangladesh and Turkey are building their first nuclear power plants. Monitoring the use of nuclear energy is the responsibility of the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency. The organization promotes the peaceful nuclear use, implements safeguards against military purposes, and it sets high safety standards. But concerns do remain. The ongoing inspections at Fukushima Daiichi highlight the challenges that the country faces, or the industry faces, I should say. The most famous nuclear accident in history, the Chernobyl disaster, is back in the news. Ukrainian officials are assessing the radiation shield entombing the destroyed power plant after an alleged Russian drone attack. The IAEA says that radiation levels remain stable, but Ukraine warns there's a risk of radioactive leaks. For more, Dr. Tilman Ruff joins me now. He's Honorary Principal Fellow at the School of Population and Global Health at the University of Melbourne. Let's start, Dr. Ruff, with Rafael Grossi's 5th visit to the Fukushima plant. It's not just to inspect, is it? The timing of it is interesting. It's just after Tokyo approves its new energy plan. What do you make of it?
Yes, I suspect the timing is no coincidence. Just the day after the strategic energy plan, as you mentioned, has been approved by the Japanese cabinet. So I think that that's no coincidence. Really, the footage of him, on a boat helping to take water samples is essentially a publicity stunt. I think it's to promote his profile and the role of the agency. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency that he heads, has a permanent team of staff based now at the site, including to monitor the water release. So the Director General's presence to lift water samples and pour jugs of them into containers is really more a publicity show than anything substantive.
Well, he does keep at it. It is his 5th visit, but I just want to talk about something else that's happening in Japan, Dr. Ruff. It's a shift to nuclear, and elsewhere along the lines of the World Economic Forum and COP events, the world is looking to nuclear too. But in Japan itself, public opinion is divided, and well, people have been personally affected there, that's why. So Mr. Grossi's affirmations about safety, what good do they do other than being just a publicity stunt, you think?
Well, look, I think the issues are somewhat different for established plants versus new plants, but certainly the continuation of nuclear power post-Fukushima is nothing new in Japan. There's been a gradual process of nuclear power plants being restarted. There are now, I believe, 14 that have already commenced operations again, resumed, but shut down completely in the years after the disaster, but to higher safety standards, which have involved significantly higher costs and site works to make sure that they supply. So in a sense, this is just an affirmation that nuclear power will continue to play a role in Japan's energy mix and reduce ambition somewhat, I guess, given the uncertainties of some of Japan's high dependence on fossil fuel supplies, given the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and particularly the US withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, Japan's long-standing concerns about its dependence on other nations for resources, and frankly, lack of leadership over many decades of really getting on with the sustainable energy transition that Japan is very capable of. So this is really a slowing of the phase out practically, because before the Fukushima disaster, Japan had 54 operating nuclear power plants. Now 14 of those have resumed. But you're right that the previous strategic energy plan was committed to a phase down of nuclear power. And indeed, the current Prime Minister assumed his role just late last year after promising that he would try to end nuclear power for Japan. So this is, in a sense, somewhat of an inconsistency in leadership policy. Public views are still very divided. Japan went from high levels of public support to nuclear power to very low levels after the Fukushima disaster, and they have trended up again. But the population is still very substantially divided. And the return to 20% of nuclear power contribution to electricity supplies is still little over half what those supplies were pre-Fukushima. So it's not really a major expansion, and much of it will happen not because of building new plants, but because of extending the life of current plants. Usually they close around 40 years. Some of the extensions already approved go to 60 years, which is really somewhat concerning, because that's essentially uncharted territory for facilities that have very high stresses within them. The radiation, the pressures, the temperatures cause materials to fatigue and age and fail. So there are some significant concerns in those life extensions that in fact will be crucial to meet this new target.
Dr. Ruff, other than geopolitics, the MPs in Japan argue that AI data processing centers and semiconductor factories will only drive up energy needs, hence the need to lean on this new energy plan. How will you see nuclear trending now that demands affect not just Japan? And could the Japanese shift to nuclear kickstart a shift globally?
I think that's fairly unlikely. I mean, in just about every country now, the cheapest way to produce electricity is with renewables, the cost of which has dramatically fallen and which continues to fall. The costs of nuclear power have continued to rise, and indeed even in countries that are experienced at building nuclear plants, the UK, France, the US and so forth, very few new plants are being built at great cost, usually at least 2 or 3 times higher than projected, and often a decade or more late. So there isn't a substantial expansion of the industry going on. Most of the current expansion worldwide is really due to China continuing to build nuclear power plants. But the share of global electricity production that's currently produced by nuclear energy at around 9%, as your story said, is less than the peak, which was around 11 to 12%, and shows signs overall of decline rather than increase.
Appreciate your insight based, of course, on your lifetime of work in this field. Dr. Tilman Rough, Honorary Principal Fellow at the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health.